People always ask about time travel. Can you go back? Can you change the past? Can you prevent something that already happened? And the answer, the short answer, is no. You can't change the past. The past is fixed, done, unchangeable. But then people get clever. They say, well, what if I go back in time and do something different? What if I prevent my grandfather from meeting my grandmother? Then I wouldn't be born. But if I'm not born, I can't go back to prevent them from meeting. So it's a paradox. And they think they found some deep problem with physics, some logical impossibility that proves time travel can't work. But that's not what it proves. What it proves is that you can't change the past. Because if you go back, whatever you do was always part of what happened. You were always there. Your actions were always part of the past. There's no changing it because it already includes everything you're going to do. Let me try to explain what I mean. First, let's talk about what we mean by the past. Most people think of the past as something that happened and then disappeared. It's gone. It's not here anymore. Only the present exists. The past is just memories. But that's not what physics says. According to relativity, according to Einstein, the past still exists. It's out there. It's a region of space-time. Just like Los Angeles and New York both exist at the same time, your childhood and your old age both exist in space-time. They're just at different locations along the time dimension. So when we talk about changing the past, we're talking about going to a region of space-time that already exists and somehow making it different from what it is. But how can you make something different from what it already is? That's not a physics question. That's a logical impossibility. It's like asking, can you make a square circle? No, because the definition of a square contradicts the definition of a circle. You can't have both properties at once. Same thing with changing the past. The past is what already happened. Changing it means making it simultaneously be two different things. What it was and what you changed it to. That's a contradiction. Okay, but what about the grandfather paradox? Doesn't that show there's a problem? Let's think it through carefully. Suppose you build a time machine. You're born in 2000. In 2025, you get in your time machine and go back to 1950. You find your grandfather as a young man before he met your grandmother. And you, I don't know, you prevent them from meeting. Maybe you distract him at a critical moment. Maybe you send him to a different city. Whatever. Now, if they never meet, they never have children. Your father or mother is never born, which means you're never born, which means you never build a time machine, which means you never go back to 1950, which means your grandparents do meet, which means you are born, which means you do build a time machine. And around we go. It's a loop, a contradiction, a paradox. So, what's the resolution? The resolution is simple. You can't prevent them from meeting. Not because some mysterious force stops you, not because the universe has a time police that enforces the rules, but because they did meet. That's a fact. That happened. And if you go back to 1950, whatever you do, it doesn't prevent them from meeting, because you know, as a matter of historical fact, that they met. Maybe you try to distract your grandfather, but you fail. Maybe you accidentally caused them to meet in the first place. Maybe your interference is the reason they got together. Who knows? The details don't matter. What matters is the past already includes everything you're going to do when you go back. Your actions are already part of what happened. You can't change it because it's already fixed. Not fixed in the sense that it's rigid or unchangeable by some physical law. Fixed in the sense that it already is what it is. And something can't be different from what it already is. That's not physics. That's just logic. Now you might say, but wait, if I go back and I'm there in 1950, doesn't that change things? Isn't my presence a change? No. Your presence is part of what happened. If you go back to 1950, then you were always there in 1950. From the perspective of someone living through 1950 forward, you showed up. That's an event that happened. It's part of the past. It's not a change to the past. It's part of what the past is. Think of it this way. Imagine you're watching a movie. You've seen it before. You know how it ends. Now you watch it again. During the second viewing, you're seeing the same events. Nothing in the movie changes just because you're watching it again. The characters do what they always did. The plot unfolds the same way. Now suppose the movie has a time travel scene. A character from the future appears in an earlier part of the story. That character was always part of the movie. Every time you watch it, they show up. Their presence isn't a change to the movie. It's part of what the movie is. Same thing with space-time. If you travel back to 1950, you're part of the 1950 scene in space-time. You were always part of it. Every time we look at that region of space-time, you're there. Your presence isn't a change. It's part of what happened. Okay, but here's where people get confused. They say, but from my perspective, before I time travel, 1950 happened without me. I wasn't there. My grandfather met my grandmother without my interference. Then I go back, and suddenly I am there. So from my subjective experience, I've changed it. But that's mixing up two different things. Your knowledge of the past is not the same as the past itself. Before you time travel, you have incomplete knowledge of what happened in 1950. You think you know the story. Your grandfather met your grandmother at a dance or whatever. But you don't know all the details. Maybe you don't know that a strange person tried to distract your grandfather that night. Maybe that detail was lost to history. Or maybe your grandfather never mentioned it because it seemed unimportant. Then you go back and you become that strange person. And now you know the full story. But the past itself didn't change. It was always that way. You just didn't know it yet. This is tricky because we're used to thinking of the past as something we learn about, not something we participate in. But if time travel is possible, you can participate in events that, from your personal timeline, are in the past. That doesn't change those events. It just means your personal timeline is more complicated than you thought. Let me try another way to think about it. Imagine space-time as a four-dimensional block. 3 space dimensions, 1 time dimension. Everything that ever happens, past, present, and future, is laid out in this block. Your entire life is a line through this block, from birth to death. Now, if you time travel, your lifeline doesn't go straight. It loops. It goes forward in time, then backward, then forward again, like a snake that doubles back on itself. From your personal perspective, moving along your lifeline, you experience events in the order you encounter them. First you live through your childhood, then your adulthood, then you build a time machine, then you go back to 1950, then you return to your own time, then you continue forward. But from the perspective of space-time as a whole, from a God's eye view looking at the whole block, your lifeline is just a path, a complicated, loopy path, but still just a path. And that path was always there. It's part of the structure of space-time. When you're in 1950, from your personal timeline, you've traveled back. But from space-time's perspective, you're just at a particular location in the block, a location that happens to be labeled 1950 in the time coordinate. And you were always at that location. Your presence there is fixed, part of the structure. So you can't change what happens in 1950 because you're part of what happens in 1950. You're part of the fixed structure of space-time. Now here's a question. If the past is fixed and you can't change it, does that mean you have no free will when you time travel? Well, that depends on what you mean by free will. If you mean Can I make choices that aren't determined by the laws of physics and the initial conditions of the universe? Then probably not. That's the old determinism versus free will debate, and it has nothing to do with time travel specifically. But if you mean, can I make choices based on my desires, thoughts, and reasoning without being forced by some external agent, then yes, you still have free will in that sense. When you go back to 1950, you're not a puppet. You're not being controlled. You make decisions based on your brain state, your goals, your personality. You might try to prevent your grandparents from meeting. You might try very hard. You might be very clever about it. But you fail. Not because some mysterious force stops you, not because you're being controlled, but because the laws of physics, the state of the world, and the choices made by everyone involved, including you, all add up in such a way that your grandparents do meet, just as they always did. Your free will is the same as it always is. You make choices. Those choices have consequences, and all of it adds up to what actually happens, which is the past, which is fixed. This might feel unsatisfying. It might feel like you're not really free if the outcome is already determined. But that's a feeling about determinism in general, not a special problem with time travel. All right, let's talk about something related. What if time travel creates parallel timelines? What if when you go back and change something, you don't change your past, but you create a new timeline where things happen differently? This idea was already popular in science fiction. In The End of Eternity by Isaac Asimov, for example, a secret organization travels through time and alters historical events. Each change creates a different version of history with unintended consequences. The characters come to realize that changing the past doesn't simply fix things. It reshapes entire timelines in unpredictable ways. Is that possible? Can you create alternate timelines? Well, maybe. Quantum mechanics has something called the many worlds interpretation. The idea is that every time a quantum measurement happens, the universe splits into multiple branches. In some branches, the particle was detected here. In other branches, it was detected there. All possibilities happen just in different branches. If that's true, and if time travel is possible, then maybe when you go back, you enter a different branch. You're not changing your original past. You're entering a parallel timeline that's similar but not identical. In that case, you could prevent your grandparents from meeting in the new timeline. But it wouldn't affect you personally because you came from a different branch. You'd still exist. You'd just be in a timeline where you were never born there. But here's the thing. We don't know if the many worlds interpretation is correct. It's one interpretation of quantum mechanics. There are others. And even if it's correct, we don't know if you can travel between branches. We don't know if backward time travel creates new branches, or if you're just visiting the existing branch. So the parallel timeline idea might be possible, but it's speculative. And even if it's possible, it still means you can't change the past in your original timeline. You can only affect other timelines. Let me come back to the main point. Why can't you change the past? Because the past is what already happened. Changing it would mean making it simultaneously be two different things. What it was and what you want it to be. That's a logical contradiction. If you could somehow make something different from what it already is, you'd break logic itself. You'd break the basic rules of reasoning. You'd have situations where A is true and A is not true at the same time. And once you allow that, you can prove anything. You can derive any conclusion. The whole structure of rational thought collapses. Physics doesn't allow that. Logic doesn't allow that. So you can't change the past. Now, can you go back to the past? That's a different question. Relativity doesn't forbid it. In fact, there are solutions to Einstein's equations that allow closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves. If you follow such a path, you'd return to an earlier time. Whether such paths exist in the real universe, we don't know. Probably not. They require exotic matter with negative energy density. We've never seen such matter. It might not exist. Or it might exist but be too difficult to manipulate. But the point is, even if you can go back, you can't change what happened. You can participate in what happened. You can be there. You can make choices and have effects. But whatever you do is always part of what happened. It's already in the structure of space-time. It's fixed. Here's another way to think about it. Suppose you're watching a play. The actors are on stage performing the script. Now suppose one of the actors steps out of the play, walks around the theater, and then steps back in earlier in the play. From the audience's perspective, the actor appears at two different times in the play. Once when they step out, and earlier when they step back in. But the play itself hasn't changed. The script is still the same. The actor stepping out and stepping back in was always part of the performance. It's part of what the play is. Time travel is like that. You're like the actor. You can step out of your normal timeline, move to an earlier point, and step back in. But the overall structure, the play of space-time, doesn't change. You were always part of it. So, final answer. Can you change the past? No, because the past already includes everything you do when you go back. Your actions are part of what happened. They're not changes to what happened. They're part of what it is. This isn't the limitation of technology. It's not something we might figure out how to overcome someday. It's a logical necessity. Something can't be different from what it already is. That's true for the past, just as it's true for anything else. Now, does that mean time travel is impossible? Not necessarily. It means you can't create paradoxes. You can't change what happened, but you might be able to participate in what happened. You might be able to visit the past. You might be able to have effects there. But those effects were always part of the past. They're not changes. They're just facts, events that happened. And once they happened, they're fixed, unchangeable. That's what it means for the past to be real, for it to exist as a region of space-time. It's out there, just as real as the present, and just as fixed. You can't change the past for the same reason you can't unring a bell, unburn a match, or unbreak an egg. Not because there's a law of physics specifically preventing it, but because changing what happened means making it not be what it was, and that's a contradiction in terms. The past is what it is. You can discover what it is. You can learn more about it. If time travel is possible, you can even participate in it. But you can't make it different from what it already is. And that's not a limitation. That's just how reality works. The past is real. It exists. And what exists, exists. It can't simultaneously exist and not exist. It can't be what it is and also be something else. That's why you can't change the past. Not because physics forbids it, but because logic does.